Welcome to the Lift Big Eat Big show number 6. It's just Colm and myself today. Mona I've also come down with COVID, but I'm coming out the other side. Mona hasn't yet come out the other side, so she won't be joining us for this one. But we're still going to bring you all of the same information that we usually do from each show. Today, we're going to cover bodybuilding for athletes. So that's whether you're a strength athlete or a sporting or team sport athlete. And then we're going to dive into some strongman news and just see where this conversation goes for today. So let's start with bodybuilding for athletes, Colm. Obviously, you come from the strongman world, and within strongman, you've got some big bodies. As you can see, if anyone's watching this on video, you can see Colm there. He's obviously done a little bit of bodybuilding work there. So do you want to maybe dive into a little bit on, does bodybuilding have a place within strongman training, or is everything geared towards getting stronger in the events?
So building muscle definitely has basically it's much needed in strongman. I suppose technically you could have just ridiculously strong muscles without lots of them. But ultimately, if you take, let's say athlete A, and you suddenly doubled his muscle fibers, he's now has raised his potential to lift a lot more. So training for hypertrophy and building bigger muscles is going to raise that ceiling of potential that an athlete could lift. So it's something that we definitely want to do. The way I think of it is basically, let's say you had 5 muscle fibers, you suddenly go to 10. All 10 of those muscle fibers are going to be able to contribute to lift a load. However, there's also how efficient, there's a lot that goes into it, but I'll just make it nice and simple. There's how efficient your muscle fibers are. So in theory, you could have athlete A with 10 muscle fibers, athlete B with 5, but athlete B's 5 are more efficient, let's say at the deadlift, and he deadlifts more than athlete B. However, if athlete B then added a further 5 and continued his deadlift training, he's going to match those muscle fibers, and then he's going to have a higher ceiling for potential. So it's definitely important, but I do think there's especially with like social media at the moment, there's a lot of various influencers who specifically target only, so they talk about only hypertrophy. For example, you might have seen, I don't know if you've seen it, James, there's a lot of things saying like squats and deadlifts are overrated, but they're talking about the context of looking purely at hypertrophy. So let's say an IFBB pro bodybuilder probably doesn't need to do a lot of squatting when they could do hat squatting, or they could do different exercises. Likewise with deadlifts, they don't really need to do deadlifts. However, in the world of strongman, you absolutely need to do these, and you might as well take advantage of the hypertrophy that they do provide. So they absolutely still do provide, provided they're done correctly, a stimulus for hypertrophy. And then the other side of that, so we want to increase the number of muscle fibers, and we want to teach those muscle fibers that we do have how to move as efficiently as possible in our chosen thing. So again, for strongman, let's say it's deadlifting. How do you teach them to get better at deadlifting? By deadlifting. So it kind of works hand in hand like that. We absolutely want to increase our muscle fibers. So technically, yes, you're building your body, but we want to also teach those muscle fibers how to do our specific task. So basically, you don't just want to choose. If you look on Instagram and you look at these certain influencers who push the very specific programs looking purely at optimizing hypertrophy, that ignore these different exercises that benefit a lot of different sports. Basically, you don't want to just copy and paste that and follow that if you do have an athletic component that you want to focus on. So kind of like James mentioned, you mentioned it in the training to failure episode, like you wouldn't generally want to train to failure if you're an athlete. However, for a bodybuilder, a lot of the times they want to, and they're doing these exercises that are a little bit easier to recover from, right? It's a lot easier to recover from a single joint movement opposed to like a deadlift and whatnot. So I would
Yeah.
say, in the context of strongman, absolutely we want to get bigger and stronger. We want to take what we can from the exercises that we have to do already, because we absolutely have to do, our deadlifts and our, farmers walk, all that sort of thing. And then on top of that, if you still are needing a bit more mass, that's when you can add in those smaller single joint exercises that are specifically, the goal there is basically to add these muscle fibers. And then because you're training the other stuff, you're teaching those muscle fibers how to work.
It's funny you mentioned about the squat and deadlift thing. Like I've read people saying that there's people saying not to squat, deadlift, etc. for size. I still haven't come across it. Then I hear you say it too, and I
Yeah,
must be following the wrong people. But it's crazy to think like, yeah, we know the squat and I guess the king of lower body exercises. Yeah, I understand if your goal is purely physique or hypertrophy, you can get it done doing anything. It doesn't quite matter. And the squat, I mean, the whole argument behind it is what the squat causes too much fatigue compared to
pretty
doing
much,
something else,
yeah.
right? But who
Um,
cares? If all you're
yeah,
doing is physique training, who cares? Like, there's a huge difference, at least from what I've seen in my experience. Physiques that are built from, I mean, this is going outside of bodybuilding for athletes, but physiques that are built from heavy compound exercises versus the ones that are coming and just pumping on machines and dumbbells is it's completely anecdotal, and I'm sure you've seen it too. But yeah, the people who have just built their muscle mass under heavy squats and deadlifts and benches and whatever else, man, like it's just the physique's denser, and the the way the body's structured from that looks denser versus their whole machine look is literally like they might look a little wide, but they look like there's nothing there. There's no meat on the bone.
yeah, I agree. I also think they're like, they're taking, again, I feel like they're taking things a little bit too far in terms of just focusing like purely on hypertrophy in kind
Yeah,
of the context of whatever studies they're looking at. But like, let's say a guy has a really good high bar squat and he's a bodybuilder. I feel like that strength in the high bar squat still will transfer to other exercises, like allowing him
yeah,
to lift more, and which should kind of potentiate his ability to put on muscle over the
keep going,
long
Cole.
term. So in the short term, I could absolutely see like a high bar squat or whatever. Let's say you're doing it and your lower back fatigues before your legs. So I was just saying, if your lower back fatigues before your legs, you haven't provided the right amount of stimulus if you're focusing on legs. So that's kind of the argument against the squat, opposed to, say, a hack squat where it's going to put you in that position where the quads should be the one that
Yeah,
fails first. But I feel like, again, this is anecdotal, like you were saying, James, but let's say over like a 5 year period, 10-year period, or longer, like the period of an athlete's whole life, even if they're focusing more on bodybuilding, I feel like the benefit of having that decent squat is going to transfer, a little bit more broadly to all these different exercises that
mm,
they can do.
that's a good call.
Whereas if you only do, let's say you only did like hack squats, leg extensions, leg press, all these moves, when you do reach a plateau and you move to a different exercise, um, I just feel like there's not as much transference,
Yeah,
in a general sense. Whereas like a squat, I feel translates mostly to most other moves. If that makes sense to you, James?
yeah. So you could literally squat your way to whatever legs. Then for variation, you could go do leg press and hack squat, and you will be stronger in those from the squat. But if you do hack squat, leg press, and you go back to squatting, you're going to suck at squatting pretty bad,
Exactly.
and then you're going to be
And
chasing your tail for growth. You're just going to have to go back to doing more machine style stuff.
yeah. So I like, if we're talking about an IFBB pro, like Mr. Olympia competitor, I can understand they're, but they're such a niche, special athlete that I don't really think the advice for them pertains to most other people, because like they've got so much muscle mass that's going to affect recovery. They're on like a
Yeah,
huge amount of PEDs that again affects things, and because of those two things, like they would have to lift such heavy loads that it can just be a little bit too risky. So they kind of need to stick to these smaller joint exercises. But if you're just a general athlete looking to gain size, it's, you're not going to be squatting. you're not going to have so much muscle mass that you're going to have to squat something ridiculous, um,
Yeah.
and put yourself at such a big risk of injury.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if you're doing like sets of 10, 10 squats, you might be working out if you're really, really strong. You might be doing like 140 kilos or 315, which would be considered a pretty strong squat, especially from an athletic population, from a non-strength sports population. Like if you're doing that much for 10, you're going to have pretty massive legs just from doing
Yeah,
something like that. And you're going to get some transfer. So, yeah, I mean, don't shy away from these big lifts for growth that people keep seeming to be saying uh, over
I can
social
send you
media.
some.
And
I
yeah,
can send you
yeah.
some of the examples if you want.
And then the algorithm will feed me more, and I'll
That's
have
true.
I'll
Yeah,
have more to report on with that. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. But if we go back to our bodybuilding for athletes as well, from a purely, let's say, team sport perspective, or maybe you're doing something with an athletic component to it, there is potentially a time and place, and I think it can be done well. Where most people fall short and do it wrong is they run the bodybuilding program as part of their sports training or as their sports training. So instead of doing, say, a typical session, a well structured session would move from fast movements to slow movements. So you would start with your fastest exercises, jumps, throws, plyometrics. You'd move into maybe your heavier ballistic exercises, Olympic lifts, loaded jumps, etc. And then your heavy strength exercise, which is your slow exercise, which might be your squats, benches, whatever else. And then you will go into your maybe hypertrophy style exercises at the end, which might be, I don't know, some kind of single leg exercise or, high rep body weight, upper body stuff. And that would be a general hierarchy of how a good session would run for athletic performance. But what people tend to do is they run the bodybuilding program and they run chest and arms on day
yeah,
one and then legs on day two, and they just blast themselves with volume. And the problem is everything else that you need to do for athletic performance has been taken out. So you're running 8 to 12 weeks of purely a hypertrophy cycle. And then after that, you're coming back to try and do whatever it is you're trying to do. And one, you put yourself at a huge increased risk of injury, especially getting back into movements that you haven't done for 12 weeks, plus doing them fast. And then two, you just haven't practiced any of the skills that you probably need to do. At least within the gym, you might be still doing your technical training, but you're going to be so damn sore and beat up from that bodybuilding style training. It's not going to help you from that technical training. So if your goal is to gain size as someone who is prioritizing athletic training, whether that's a sport or whatever, it needs to be worked into it needs to work within everything else. So
yeah,
you should touch on all physical qualities all the time, contrary to what most people say, where they're telling you to do a hypertrophy phase, then a strength phase, then a power phase. Because every time you move from phase to phase, you lose something because you're not doing what you were doing before, or you haven't done what you're gonna do in the future. Because people will say, okay, hypertrophy, then I'll potentiate to strength because I have bigger muscles, so I'll be able to get stronger. And okay, I've got all the strength, now I'm going to turn the strength into power, but it doesn't work like that. Because by the time you get to your power phase, you haven't done anything to maintain that muscle mass. Or by the time you've finished, or even within the strength phase, you're still not doing anything to maintain that maximal strength. Or within the hypertrophy phase, you're not doing any max strength or power work to be able to develop those qualities. So you're basically playing catch up as you go through each phase. So instead, again, that fast to slow is a really simple way to structure a session. Obviously, as you get more advanced, you can start complexing exercises. So you might be doing like squats supersetted with box jumps, benches supersetted with medicine ball throws, things like that. And then you might finish with some bodybuilding style stuff if you need it.
yeah,
Obviously, if it's a goal of yours, yes, you'll add it. And a really simple way of doing it, especially for upper body, is to do what I really like to prescribe. I really like to do myself is set rep goals, but for body weight upper body movements. So it could be like push ups and inverted rows, and you have to get, for example, 50 of each, and you just superset back and forth until you get 50 reps. And the benefit of doing something like that is one, you get a lot of extra volume, which will help with muscle growth. Two is body weight. So you don't have a lot of stress on the joints doing all these extra reps and extra volume. At 3, it's not that hard to recover from because it's just body weight. And that's a really simple way of adding bodybuilding style training to your regular training without doing too much extra that's going to hamper maybe your technical training or your other gym training or whatever it is you're doing, because it's easy to recover from. Doing that with typically with lower body, typically I avoid hypertrophy stuff with lower body for athletes, or at least athletes that are running based sports. So everything is kind of strength based and you kind of get the residual hypertrophy from that anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to sit there and target sets of 10, 20 lunges or things like that, or 20 leg presses kind of thing for an athlete, because they need their legs to do whatever it is they need to do for their sport. So it's only upper body that I tend to do this for athletes, and lower body is just taken care of with the heavy strength training. So just bear that in mind as well, as an athlete too. Like the legs, you likely don't want to do a bunch of hypertrophy training for if you need them for your sport.
And like you said, if they're like there is a doing their regular, let's say they're doing their strength work, there should be like a hypertrophy response anyway, right? I
Yeah,
would look like before adding in, like if someone says to me, like let's say a rugby player or something like that, and they're already doing some squats, just the general kind of strength training stuff that you do for rugby, and they ask me like they want to add in, they want to add in Bulgarian split squats, they want to add in all this extra stuff on top of what they're already doing. If like my go-to, to be honest, is ask them like, are you sleeping right and are you eating right? Because a lot of the times I find they're not, which is kind of limit the amount of impact the training that they're doing at the moment already has if they're under eating and under recovering. And then they're essentially wanting to add more to dig, like they're just going to end up digging themselves a hole. So I
yeah,
think like what you said is right, right? Like you should, like if you're a rugby player and you're already doing your squats and compounds, whatever, with the goal of increasing strength, they should, if those lifts are going up over time and you're hitting
yeah,
the appropriate rep ranges and you're sleeping right and you're eating right. Obviously, it kind of depends on like um, what your coach wants for that particular position, but assuming that you're trying to gain mass, so you're going to be in a surplus. If you're in a surplus, you're sleeping right, and you're increasing that like weight on the bar over time, you should be putting on some size lower body wise. Whereas if you are not doing those things and you add extra low body movements, that's just going to add more fatigue. That's not really going to,
yeah.
that's not going to give you that outcome that you want.
Before getting back to the podcast, I want to let you know that down in the description is a link to the Lift Big, Eat Big Underground. And within that, you get access to all our training programs, online courses, and into our private Discord community, where all 3 of us are in there to help you with whatever it is with your training. Regarding the programs, we have Mona, who's done all of the weightlifting cycles. We have Colm, who's done the strongman off-season and strongman competition programs. Then we have all the hallmark Lift Big, Eat Big training programs, Pump Dragon, Flanks Method, and many more. And I've also added muscle building specialization programs within that, and are continuing to update and add training programs into our app. You also get access to Mona's Weightlifting Mastery online course, and you get to join these calls live in the audience where you can ask members only question and answers at the end of each episode. So if that sounds like you, go down in the description. There's a link there to the Lift Big Epic Underground, and that'll give you access to everything I just mentioned. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. People don't realize that you can gain, you end up gaining mass as just over the long term of strength training, even if you're not getting a lot of volume and you're just maybe your squats are going up week to week, month to month, that you will add size to your legs.
Absolutely.
You don't need to go through these high volume programs. It's consistency over long periods, and obviously the sleep and nutrition obviously plays a role in that too. But yeah, you'll be surprised. Like it's one of those weird things as well. I think completely, I guess, anecdotal, no evidence, anything like that. But like, for example, doing a few sets of squats, say 3 sets of 5 squats over time is going to give you the growth. But doing the same thing on leg press and stuff, it just doesn't. I don't know. It's just another thing. It's a weird one.
Yeah.
It sounds
And
like an
I,
affinity for squats, but
I feel like the that kind of recommendation of, say, choosing more exercises that are more specific so you can get more targeted volume or whatever, I think they apply again more to like an advanced bodybuilder looking for a
Mm.
very specific thing. Whereas, again, just doing your squats, like let's say you really break it down and you like looked at one of the meta analysis that looks at all the results. The results we're talking in terms of differences are still very small, even though they might be like statistically significant. They're still very small. Like, let's say even one of them would, let's say like a traditional bodybuilding style with lots of these exercises, blah blah blah. Let's say it gave a 5% like bigger increase in hypertrophy. This is just making up numbers. Like 5% would be pretty big. But if you compared that to your regular strength rugby program, let's say that like increased the amount of hypertrophy that you've got at the moment by like 2%. That's still an increase over time, and that's still going to work in the context of all the rest of your training and your sport. Whereas if you just did that, if you're just targeting, you want that 5% extra gains, it's going to come at the cost of all that other sports performance. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like, if you absolutely just want to get as jacked as possible, then yeah, it makes sense to train like a bodybuilder. But if you actually have athletic goals, um, yeah, you want to take advantage of of the training that you're already doing with good nutrition and good sleep. And I have an anecdote myself of
Mm.
doing just like what we were talking about before. I remember probably the first ever bodybuilding magazine I got. It had Phil Heath on the cover, and this was before, so I think he had just won his pro card, so he wasn't even like
Oh, well,
officially a pro yet. But he
you were
had
like
a
early to the game.
yeah, this was quite a while ago. Um, but like I had just been training myself doing whatever, and then I got this magazine, and it had in it his 5 day like training split, and it must have been like 5 or 6 exercises every day.
Yeah. 8 to 12
Um,
reps.
yeah, 8 to 12 reps every single one. It was so much volume, and I did it like so. I was very new to training, so I was weak as. But I remember doing. I was getting into Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu and stuff. So I was like, this is perfect. I've got this program. I can just do this. I'm gonna gain size. Then I'm gonna go to Muay Thai in the evening or whatever. I remember my legs because it was a body part split, and
Yeah.
just like you were saying before, James, high volume. My legs were so fucked. I just fully caved and didn't go to the gym, so I missed my sports training. Bang! What's gonna make me a better fighter? Doing actual Muay Thai training or lots of squats and leg press and whatnot. It's kind of obvious.
Phil Heath's routine for
Um,
sure.
yeah, and then the next day, like my upper body would be destroyed. So it doesn't like I know it's the like I fully made this mistake, so I understand why people do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's the most
but
accessible
yeah,
training
it's
programs too, right? Like if you
what's
search
that?
anything online, they're the most accessible training programs. Like if you search
Yeah,
training program, whatever for this, they're all bodybuilding programs on the internet, all the free ones. You know?
yeah.
So it's kind of like the first thing you find is that. So what else are you gonna run?
And the thing is, like, as a beginner, would I like doing all this high as volume? I would have got like the same results if, like, as a beginner, just doing some basic strength training and then being able to go to training in the evening. Obviously, like this was before I was even at uni. I knew absolutely nothing, but it's
Hmm.
yeah, it's a common trap to fall into. So rewind this video and listen to those recommendations James said before if you are unsure. But that hitting each like different training method like you're talking about, absolutely agree with.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. I think that concludes our little bodybuilding for athletes segment there. Maybe let's move on to what's happening within the strongman world. I know you got something going on with. Wait, Thor tore his pick, right? But he's
Yeah.
what's he up to now?
So we never really spoke about it because of World's Strongest Man. But yeah, it's I believe so. I know he's torn muscles before, but I'm pretty sure this is the first kind of major tendon rupture that he's needed surgery for. I could be wrong, but like I've followed him, for years, competed with him and whatnot. And I know he's like torn his quad and stuff like that before. I'm sure he's torn his pec before, but actually rupturing the tendon off the bone to require surgery, I don't believe he's had. So I do find it quite interesting where his head's going to be at. I don't think he's really said yet, but he had some massive goals, right? Like he didn't want to just come
Mm.
back and be strong. He wanted to come back and be stronger than he was at a lighter body weight than he was. Um, so in hindsight, right? Hindsight is 2020. We could look back and be like, of course he was going to tear his pec. He was trying to bench. I think he was benching 250, which is what his best was when he was a lot bigger and had,
Yeah.
been training. Like he had done worlds. He didn't have the longest prep for that powerlifting meet he benched 250 at. But, if you've been training for a while compared to now where he's been off with his boxing and whatnot, and he's at a lighter body weight, it makes sense. But I think it's a bit harsh just to lump it in on him and say, he should have been smarter because he's always been one of these guys. He's a genetic freak, right? Six
Hmm.
foot eight or 6'9", like
Damn.
able to carry 200 kgs with abs. He's an absolute outlier as it is. And he's been world's strongest man. He's been on the podium like how many times? He's never had one of these injuries before by doing what he was doing already. So I don't know. I feel like it's a bit, although we can sit here now that he's torn it, I feel like he's done this kind of thing before. Actually, before he deadlifted the 500, I remember a lot of people, he would have gone off his drug cycle and whatnot, and he got a lot smaller, and people were saying he's done, he's never going to come back. He came back so fast, and then he like ended up deadlifting 501. So you could put that same, you could apply the same argument now to back then. So he's gotten away with this so many times. It seems like it's finally caught up to him. So
Mm.
I am curious what he's going to think, whether he wants to take it a little bit slower coming back, or if he's going to do the classic strongman method, load up on a bunch of PEDs, come back ridiculously fast and lift something ridiculously heavy, but probably tear something again. I would say that's pretty common. Like we see that quite a lot. Um, which yeah, I'm interested in to see how it's going to go basically.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think you
I
mentioned as well that he was at an increased risk of injury, right? Because he's doing it at a lighter body weight. So he's
yeah
just
yeah
like setting himself and older age too to factor in.
yeah
Yeah.
I do think like I was going to ask you what because in I've got to say like just thinking about it, strongman. There's so many. Like I'm not saying he can't come back though. That's the thing. I definitely think he can. And like, let's say Zydrunas Savickas, right? He
Yeah.
tore off both quad tendons,
Oof.
um, doing I think it was a Conan's wheel just when he was a pro, but like starting out as a pro, and then he ended up going on to become, probably the goat of strongman. So I don't think Thor can't come back at all. But I am curious what his approach will be. But I'm curious, like, what other sports do you reckon have such major injuries and then people come back? Like, do you think it's more a case of the sport or just being a high level genetic freak athlete? Like,
What would you call a huge injury? Would you call like an ACL a huge injury?
yep, I would classify that.
I mean, that's pretty much like every every team sport.
Yeah. So
Mm.
do they come back from it and get better? They would.
Some of
Like,
them will get back to where they
yeah.
were. You'll
Because I
see
feel
like
like,
Achilles seemed to be Achilles. I mean, you remember when Sean Johnson did his Achilles, and now he's only finally now kind of hitting a stride again. How many years later?
yeah.
A lot of that's a confidence thing too. Yeah,
And I
it's
feel
interesting.
like with those team sports, the movements are so much faster and there's so much more reacting that I feel like it would be harder mentally, but also just physically. Say Sean Johnson coming back, stepping and whatnot, opposed to Thor coming back, and let's say he wants to bench press again. He's in control, if you know what I mean. He's not going to
Yeah,
suddenly have a player that he has to react to. So I feel like it's a little
yeah.
bit easier. than team sports in that regard. And
Yeah,
then
except it was just
obviously
the
the
absolute loading though. The absolute loading is the thing that's mentally hard within
yeah,
strength sports. But like
yep,
I had a sevens guy in one of our first sevens matches literally snap his ankle and his foot was like this way. It was filth. Like it wasn't even like under his leg. And I was like, holy shit. But he's come back and he seems to be like better than ever. So
oh, that's awesome,
it's
especially for
yeah,
sevens. You'd need that, sure.
you need your feet. So
Yeah,
so yeah, it's interesting. But the thing is in strength sports, it's yeah. The scary thing is the absolute load. Because you
yeah,
can start back and you start with the bar or something, and oh, this feels okay. And then you get back to, those weights and you're like, ooh, this is where it happened last time, or is this too much? But basically, can the tissue tolerate whatever it is the load you're trying to put through it?
yeah. I think the other thing that makes it a bit easier for strength sports, well, strongman specifically, is just the PEDs. The fact that there's no,
Mm.
no testing, they can go crazy basically.
What are guys
Um,
taking to speed up their recovery?
BPC 157 is the big one, that
That's the big
peptide.
peptide. Yeah.
That and growth hormone, but from what I hear, like the peptide is meant to be the gold standard now.
Really
I think, like, yeah,
interesting.
I'm pretty sure guys favor that over growth hormone. And
Wow.
plus, um, a lot of sports clinics seem to offer it, not here, but in the States.
Yep.
So it seems to have some promising
It's legal
research behind it.
outside of sport. So people go get peptide therapy and all sorts of stuff. And there's places all around here for BPC 157 and all the other CJC and whatever other compounds are. But it was an interesting space, the whole peptide space. I wonder how, yeah, obviously, I wonder how much it's infiltrated into various sports now that it's banned. Only got banned recently too. I think it was like
Yeah,
last
I
year.
was gonna ask about that because is it so they can test for it then?
I don't know. I don't know how they do it, but I just know they banned it somehow, and I don't know how they test for it. But
Yeah,
they banned all peptides, which is
yeah,
interesting. It's very interesting considering it's such like you say, a new space with a lot of these
yeah,
things. I mean, BBC 157, that seems to be the one that everyone is using, whether it's for orally for gut health or injecting it into whatever their pain sites are and then speeding up recovery that way. And then obviously there's other ones that are for growth hormone and body comp.
And the thing is, um, you just know, like a professional athlete, right, football player or whatever, if they're making millions of dollars, suddenly they've sustained this injury, like it affects the whole team. You just know they're going to be like the
Oh,
people around them are
dude,
going to
those
be
in
helping
the
them. Like
NFL and
it's kind
stuff,
of a
man, like
guarantee.
there's juicing, like it's just like there's no way there's not juicing going.
Yeah.
Of course, there's juicing going on. They're like at least not test like that. All they care about is the product on the field. You know,
Mm.
it's the same, isn't it? Major League Baseball. I think they test once in the beginning of preseason, and then if you pass, you don't get tested again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you want to see home runs, right? So why would they
Yeah.
stop you?
I mean, as a fan for me, I absolutely want to see, especially in strongman, I want to see the biggest, freakiest dudes lifting the craziest amount of weights. So yeah, I mean, I don't ethically, I don't mind at all. Um, but I suppose I do. I mean, I care about athlete health with the athletes I know, but I suppose ultimately I'm a bit selfish. Like I'm a big fan of still Pride, and like I like seeing the soccer kicks. But obviously, I know that's terrible for athlete health, so I can't really say I'm 100% for athlete health. But
Well, the only thing
um,
with doping is it takes away from non-dopers and a way of living, basically. Like
yeah,
that's pretty
it is.
much that argument against it.
Yeah, if there's testing and it's not meant to be, and you're not meant to be taking stuff, it definitely, yeah, you shouldn't be taking
Yeah,
stuff really. Um, but yeah, I mean, let's say my favorites, right? Pride. Remember, you heard the stories in Pride FC, how it was in their contract, like we will not
yeah,
test for steroids. Had
yeah.
the most insane fights, most
Well, the
insane
ADCC is
rules.
the same.
Yeah,
They've come out publicly and said they don't test because they want to see the best athletes.
I didn't realize they made a statement. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That I was going to mention actually, when we were talking about bodybuilding and athletes, I feel like Gordon Ryan
Oh
has
yeah.
he just does his bro split, right?
Yeah.
Um,
His
I've
missus
had
is some ex bodybuilding person or bodybuilding coach. Something she just coaches him, and that's just straight. It's just straight like chest and arms all
Yeah,
day.
because I've had people ask me like, why can't I just do this? Like Gordon Ryan's doing his like set to 20 leg presses and all this stuff. Um, but yeah, I think that's an example. Like to if someone brought up Gordon Ryan to refute what we were saying earlier, I would say, like I'm curious what you would say. To me though, I would say again, he's an outlier. He dominates like
Yeah,
black belts and stuff on a level no one else ever does. And I feel like he could just do a better. I do feel like he could do a better strength and conditioning program. Um,
it
and
doesn't
then
matter.
there's that. So to me, I feel like he's got elite genetics, and then he's obviously got PEDs, which he's admitted PEDs, right?
Yeah. Uh huh.
Um, so I would say like, do you have elite genetics? Probably not. So stick to our recommendations. Are you on PEDs? Maybe yes or no. But if you don't have the elite genetics, it's not gonna,
Yep.
it's not
And
really gonna
then
make up.
are you technically 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the world,
Yeah,
which is the deciding factor because nothing else matters.
that's true.
It doesn't matter what
Yeah,
he does for training. It's like everyone. I mean, if you've seen Usain Bolt's training, or even LeBron James, everyone's like LeBron doesn't even squat full depth, and
I've
then you
seen him
see
squats.
you
Yeah,
see Usain Bolt with his hang power cleans, and he doesn't even like catch the bar, nothing. People are like, oh my god, if Usain Bolt just lifted properly, he would run even faster. And you're like, bro, this guy he's
yeah.
run the world record 9.57, and he hasn't beaten it. No amount of fucking hang cleans are going to make him run 9.56.
Hmm.
None. Zero.
Yeah.
Zero, zero, zero. Same thing with LeBron. LeBron is not going to get better at basketball because he sinks his squats down a few inches deeper so he hits parallel. Like none of
Mm,
none of that training stuff matters at that elite level of sport.
yeah.
Because all that matters is are you awesome at the sport and can you stay injury free? And if you can do both of those, you can literally do anything else in the world for your training. I mean, that's why you see so much dumb shit because it literally does not matter. It literally does not matter. I mean, I've had so many players that suck balls in the gym, but were so good on the field that it doesn't matter. You just
Mm,
kind of like they just be consistent with the gym stuff, and then whatever happens on the actual sport, that's what matters. That's what they get paid to do. That's their livelihood. Anything else, again, doesn't matter. I mean, I don't know how many other athlete examples there are of just absolutely. I mean, just look at soccer, bro. Far in the like EPL, the top Spanish leagues and stuff, those coaches get paid bank, and the training is the most dog shit training in the whole world, like the worst. You can't get
yeah.
worse. You can't get worse training than a soccer team. If you look up any video of soccer training, it all sucks balls. But it doesn't matter because they just play soccer. Often they have to play twice a week, so they do minimal shit stuff that like doesn't move the needle for anything. If anything, it just kind of adds. It's like almost like a warm up because it's so shit. And then they just do their little games, and then that's it. And all that matters is the soccer skill. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen plenty of examples of just
Oh,
crazy, crazy.
I remember working at AET when the Rugby World Cup was on, and we would see
Oh yeah,
various teams training at the AET gym. Just like they have a game like 2 days away. They're doing like force reps on bench press.
yeah,
Like guys helping them like lift. Like they're doing some just ridiculous stuff. It just seemed like ego lifting, to be honest. Um, which I think might have been part of it. They're just trying to get like the coaches were fine with it, just wanted to get their confidence up for the game and whatnot.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I would be pretty fucked after some of those things that they were doing.
yeah, yeah. So if anyone's listening, copying your favorite athlete's training probably isn't the best idea. Bodybuilding or not, bodybuilding or not, because it's probably going to be something less than ideal. Is there anything else happening in the strongman world,
Uh,
or do we have any questions? I think we had one question, didn't we, from your IG? We had something about marathon training, right up our wheelhouse.
Do you write full marathon training plans from Alex Horn?
Shout out to Alex. And no, we do not write full marathon training programs. Lift big, eat big is about lifting big and eating big, not about running big distances. Funny enough, though, I've worked with a few endurance and ultra endurance athletes with strength training.
Yeah,
It is a
same.
very important aspect of that kind of training. I mean, I don't think the listeners might be too interested in it, so we'll keep this very brief. But basically, super low volume, super high intensity, plyometrics, and that's jumps, and that's pretty much it. It's very basic, very low volume because they're going to run a shit ton of miles.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do with my client who's she does ultra,
Oh, there you go.
which is ridiculous sport in itself.
Yep. So for anyone who's doing endurance style training, then that's your thing. Don't go to the gym to do endurance reps as an endurance athlete. That's the big mistake that everyone makes. They go, okay, endurance training zone, 15 plus reps. I'm going to do everything 15 plus reps. No, you do everything for 1 to 5 reps max on your big lifts, and you do things relatively heavy, but you do things far away from failure, and you just make progress that way. Good exercise, say trap bar deadlift with the high handles, 3 sets of 3. You might do that 80%, 85%. You've got heaps left in the tank, and you can kind of wave up and down those week to week, and that amount of volume will not fatigue you for the running or cycling, whatever it is you're doing. So make sure you follow that low volume, high intensity approach. But I don't think we have anything else to cover, do we, Colm? No more questions, no nothing else.
Nope, nothing specific.
All right. A little short one today, but make sure you check the description. There's the Lift Big, Eat Big Underground. We have all the training programs in there. It's like, I think it's 26, potentially 27 and counting programs in there now. Colm is about to release another program, a conjugate style strongman program that will give you some options. We'll have that published in the next couple of weeks. There's also Colm's Farmers Handle Specialization Program. That's actually really cool. There's literally a whole training program dedicated to the use of the Farmers Handle. So if you have a home gym and that's one of the pieces of equipment you have, that's something you can do to get a massive back. Obviously, we also have Colm's off-season training program in there. We have Mona's, all her weightlifting cycles are within the app as well. So you can run through basically a year or more of training for weightlifting. And then we have all of the landmark strength and size programs as well, Pump Dragon, Flanks Method, the Mule. All of those are all in there from the old Lift Big Eat Big programs that you can run that have ridiculously high volumes, and you can smash those out if your goal is just to get absolutely huge. They're all in there. And then also we're all in the private Discord community there to answer any of your questions. But we will see you next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, and tune in for the next episode.